Last on Everdark, Daemon is determined to prove he is king. Now we come back to Balthazar and Christian, whose first feeding was interrupted by Ray, an Acolyte. Everdark, Episode 20. Respect. Ray, you shouldn't be here, Balthazar said, and while his voice wasn't angry exactly, it was crisp. Christian saw a young man, blonde like him with sky-blue eyes and pouty lips, react to it. Those slender but muscular shoulders curled inwards, and an almost guilty look crossed his fox-like features. But then Ray shook off whatever he was feeling at that tone and allowed his anger to rise again like a phoenix.
He looks like me.
Ray spat as he narrowed his eyes at Christian. Actually, you look like him, Balthazar murmured with a rather guilty glance at Christian. Christian, who was still in the vampire lord's arms, stiffened at that confession. Balthazar had been fantasizing about him with this Ray for who knew how long, and Christian hadn't even known that the vampire lord existed. Christian knew that this fear of being thought of by those who he didn't know was foolish. He and Julian had a very successful web series. Tons of people thought of him, and he didn't know them and likely would never know them.
It's because this reminds me of David watching me, stalking me. That's why Balthazar unnerves me. But he isn't David. He's nothing like him. That he admired me before we met doesn't put them all in the same category. My reaction is not logical. It's atavistic. I will conquer it.
Balthazar slowly drew a hand down Christian's spine to comfort him. But Christian wanted to be free. He pulled back. Balthazar immediately released him. There wasn't the slightest use of that great strength to hold him near, even though he knew that Balthazar was hurt by his drawing back.
Not like David, see? Not gonna hold me against my will. Not gonna... Everything is fine. Fine.
The tightness in Christian's chest eased as he settled himself on the couch on a separate cushion from the vampire lord. He needed space. He needed distance. He needed to calm down and force reason upon his emotions. He found himself licking at the little bit of blood still on his lips from their feeding. The taste actually made him feel better. Actually, it made him feel safe. Ray smirked.
Well, it appears that the only thing similar about us is looks. I've never been so bashful about being seen in an embrace with you, Balthazar. Far more than that. We've fucked in front of an audience dozens of times. I bet he won't even let you hold his hand.
Enough, Ray. Balthazar's voice was ice, and the note of command was in the air as well. Christian recognized it from the blood den. Ray immediately went silent. But more than that, his face went blank. He stood there like an empty-headed doll. Christian's gaze snapped to the vampire lord. Balthazar squeezed the top of his nose and murmured something in what sounded like French. Finally, he lowered his hand, and though he looked as beautiful as ever, he appeared tired and sad. I'm sorry about that, Christian. He shouldn't have been allowed up here, let alone to say such things. I will fix this. I will be gone for a moment. Balthazar stood up. Christian grasped his wrist gently.
What are you gonna do?
Without waiting for an answer, he plowed on.
You're gonna wipe his mind, aren't you?
That tired and sad look became more apparent on Balthazar's handsome visage. Christian found himself liking the vampire lord a lot for that look. Ray seemed like an arsehole, but that rudeness towards Christian had come from hurt. Still, even if it hadn't, Christian wouldn't have wanted someone's mind to be wiped just because they were a jerk. Yes, Christian, I must do it. Remember those boundaries I talked about between a vampire and an acolyte? I crossed them with Ray because... Balthazar's lips flattened, and Christian could tell that the vampire lord didn't want to tell him why, was considering lying, but tossed that away too.
Because he looks like me?
Christian guessed. One of Balthazar's eyebrows raised. Yes, pet, because he looks like you.
You are not calling me pet.
Christian scowled. An impish smile quirked the corners of Balthazar's lips. Oh? I don't know. I rather like...
Seriously, Balthazar, what will happen to Ray?
Christian insisted and lightly squeezed Balthazar's wrist. It was the same wrist he had drunk from, and then, in a fit of madness, had kissed Balthazar afterwards. What had possessed him to do that? But just as he realized that David was the cause of him shying away from Balthazar, his body at least had no problem desiring the vampire lord. It was more honest than his mind was at times. The vampire lord sighed. He will be given false memories of traveling the world for 2 years. His social media has been reflecting this fake life for the whole time he's been here. He'll have lots of experiences and do-gooding on his resume. He will be offered a prestigious job by another of our acolytes in another city very far away from here. He will be happy and content and never know the truth. Christian considered this. Ray was being paid for his time with a good career and pleasant memories. He would never regret losing what he didn't remember.
But it's all a lie. The most important things to ever happen to him, the knowledge that supernatural, immortal beings exist, and the fact that he loved one of them, will be erased.
Christian whispered.
It's terrible.
And necessary. Another sigh and squeeze on the top of his nose. You have to understand, Christian, that not every acolyte can be turned into a vampire. First, it would mean too many of us. Second, not all are suited to eternity. The things that make someone a good acolyte don't translate to being a good vampire. Believe me when I tell you that Ray would never have been turned with or without this display tonight.
Why not?
If it were possible. Balthazar looked more exhausted. His shoulders slumped. We can tell what personality types will thrive as vampires and which will be problematic. Some of the things that made Ray would make him likely to go out of control as a vampire. He leaps before he looks and overshares. He pushes boundaries, not in a good way, but in ways that would break the very rules that keep vampires safe. If he were turned, I am almost certain he would have been put down in the end. Christian stiffened.
Put down? You mean killed?
A nod from Balthazar had Christian staring into those blank, doll-like eyes of Ray.
So, some fake memories and a job are better options.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Christian said finally. Balthazar's brow furrowed. For what? You aren't responsible for this.
for not realizing how hard this is for you. Earlier, I acted like you were being cavalier with people. I can see that's not true now.
Christian admitted.
I can see doing this hurts you.
Balthazar dipped his head back and stared up at the ceiling. You shouldn't feel sorry for me, Christian. This was my fault. I allowed the lines to be crossed because I really wanted you, and Ray was a convenient substitute. Ray is nothing like you, ironically, but he semi-satisfied an itch I had, and now this is the price for it. We lose a good acolyte.
So you really didn't want Celine to hurt Julian or me?
Christian asked. Not that he had disbelieved Balthazar about this earlier, but it was utterly clear to him now how her actions were completely against Balthazar's wishes. God, no. I have no idea why she and Heath did this. Celine's master, Timothy, has disappeared, and Elena is, as you know, unconscious. But there is more here than just two acolytes going beyond what I asked of them, Balthazar answered, and his expression darkened. I have a bad feeling that I've been betrayed. Christian resisted the urge to apologize again. It wasn't logical to do so, yet he found himself not liking to see Balthazar upset.
Likely part of the master-fledgling bond, and yet I don't feel compelled in any way to care for him, so maybe I just feel badly for him naturally.
Our house is exiled, Christian. If we cannot trust one another, then there is simply nothing left, Balthazar explained. At that moment, there was the sound of the patter of footsteps coming up the stairs, and a frantic Laura appeared in the doorway. She saw Ray and looked startled at his presence and the blank look on his face. But that clearly wasn't what was bringing her to them and causing her such great distress. What is it, Laura? Balthazar commanded.
There's a fight! A fight in the main house!
she cried. Christian was off the couch. His hearing had suddenly become exquisitely sensitive, and he could hear Julian demanding someone not touch another person.
Daemon, Julian,
Christian said.
They're being attacked!
Damn it! Balthazar and he ran out of the room, leaving Laura and Ray behind. He hoped they wouldn't be too late to stop whatever was happening in the main house.
This is a PSA about supporting your favorite small creators. The Wraith Rain team also supports other small creators. We all belong to Patreons or contribute to Kickstarters for independent podcasters, musicians, indie games, personal YouTube shows, and things like that. We know that our money doesn't go to executives. It goes right to the people who create the work that we enjoy. And because we're also small creators, we know that every Patreon subscription, stream donation, and merch sale not only keeps things going in a practical way, but also emotionally. Everyone who gives us money is directly telling us that we're important to them, and it's really inspiring. We want to encourage you to do the same thing. Whoever it is that you really enjoy, if their work adds to your life, entertains, or educates you, consider supporting them somehow if you can, on their Patreons, buying merch, donating on stream, or anything you can think of.
Earlier, Julian had to practically run after Daemon. The vampire king swept up the stairs, his long, flowing fur jacket spreading out behind him like a pair of wings. The 3 vampires that had been speaking about him went silent as soon as Daemon appeared. Arceus immediately bowed low, while the other 2 looked at Daemon out of narrowed eyes. One was a young man who looked hardly older than 13, with hair so pale it was almost white. In contrast, the woman beside him had hair as black as a raven's wing, with a matching form-fitting dress and a choker of pearls around her swan-like throat.
My king, Julian, I did not expect you to be here.
Arceus's surprise could not be hidden. That was understandable. He had left them with Daemon unconscious on the bed, and Julian weak as a kitten. Yet here they both were in good health. Julian's stomach clenched a little with hunger pangs, though. He really needed to eat, or he'd be in a bad state. Daemon's head swung towards him, but Julian made a small movement with his hand. He was fine, for now. They didn't have to rush off, though maybe he should have suggested that, considering the looks that the boy and woman were giving them.
Hey, Arceus, we were just heading to get some food.
Julian winced a little at calling people food.
Could you maybe point the way?
The idea of Daemon proving to these angry, nettled vampires he was their king suddenly seemed like a very bad idea. Distracting Daemon with food was the much better course. Daemon inclined his head, and Arceus straightened up from his bow.
Of course. I would be honored to take you to the coach house.
You're going to let them feed on our acolytes?
It was the woman who spoke. She sounded outraged. Arceus kept his tone level and even as he answered her.
Of course, Isabel. These are Balthazar's guests, regardless of what you may be thinking. Balthazar is treating the vampire con artist who killed Heath and Celine like a guest? Has he lost his mind?
It was the boy who spoke.
William?
Arceus's voice was tinged with outrage. His gaze flickered between the white-haired boy and Daemon. He knew that these words were meant to offend, and clearly he had no doubt that they would be answered by the Vampire King with violence. Remembering how easily Daemon killed, Julian totally agreed with his assessment.
Hold your tongue. You are out of line.
Daemon, surprisingly, said and did nothing. After his appearance as a horde of wolves before, Julian had expected him to do something dramatic, or just snap William's neck like a twig and walk on. But he was simply observing everything and everyone. Unlike Arceus, he didn't appear moved at all by William's anger. William stepped over to Daemon on slender legs. The boy, for he was a boy, was thin as a rail. He looked like a strong wind could push him over. But he went right up to the Vampire King without fear, an angry, predatory light in his silver eyes. He was over a foot shorter than Daemon, and had to tip his head back to meet the Vampire King's gaze. Yet the difference in their sizes didn't daunt him at all.
You killed Heath. You killed Celine. They were my friends, my family. You have devastated Elena, and we cannot even find Timothy. He's likely stricken down somewhere, perhaps having suffered his second death too. That's 4 people in our house you have harmed.
William's voice was arctic.
Balthazar wants us to treat you like a guest. I cannot do this. Even if you were the legendary king of all vampires, I would want you dead.
In a movement so fast, Julian didn't even see it happening. William's right hand shot for Daemon's throat, but he didn't make it there. Only it wasn't Daemon who had stopped him. It was Julian. Julian found his hand was wrapped around William's right wrist, holding it in place with seeming ease. He hadn't even realized he'd done it. It was like his body knew what was coming from William even as his mind struggled to keep up. No other vampire had made a move. Daemon hadn't even blinked. It was as if he had expected this to happen all along.
Don't touch him,
Julian found himself saying.
Don't you dare touch him. If you wish to blame someone for Celine and Heath's deaths, then you need to blame me. I asked Daemon to kill them. They were trying to kill Christian and I first. It was self-defense, but I'm the one ultimately responsible for them dying.
Then you will die too!
William hissed and wrenched his arm away from Julian. The childlike vampire was set to strike out again. Arceus bellowed for him to stop and made a move to wrap his bear-like arms around the boy who seemed to be all muscle. But there was no need. William was suddenly floating in mid-air. His eyes went wide. He clawed at the air with his hands and kicked at it with his feet, trying to get purchase. But he was as harmless as a kitten.
Asher bloodline. Telekinesis.
Isabel murmured. It was only then that he noted her fingernails had seemingly grown into claws. But she didn't look like she was going to use them. Her eyes were huge with shock. Daemon tilted his head to the side as he moved his right hand in the air, which in turn moved William until the young man was floating on his stomach at his eye level. William had stopped hissing and spitting. He didn't look as brave as he had before. There was a hint of fear in those silver eyes. But he did not beg for his life. Julian had to give him credit for that. He would have personally been peeing himself a little if Daemon looked at him with such an outright alien stare. There was the thump of many feet and the rush of clothing. Over a dozen vampires appeared in all of the doorways. There was no way out of that room that wasn't filled with enemies. Julian's heart beat hard. Fangs and claws were exposed. Silver eyes shining in the dark were fixed upon them. The vampires started to advance.
People, you all need to disperse.
Arceus waved a hand towards the vampires, but it did no good. They continued to move in. Stop. One word. Just like Balthazar, except it felt more primal. It felt like that word settled into Julian's bones, imprinted there. He felt that if Daemon had meant it to be more than simply stop moving, that it could have stopped all their hearts and breathing and their very existence.
Eyros bloodline. Mind control.
Isabel croaked. Arceus cleared his throat, awe written on his face, even though he had already accepted Daemon as their king.
All of you need to leave. Balthazar will explain.
Let them stay, Daemon said, out loud. His voice was rich and rolling. There was something of a mid-Atlantic accent about it, or maybe French, or maybe German, or... It was like nothing on this earth. It was beautiful, though, and it commanded. It was like hearing music.
Siren bloodline. Song compulsion.
Isabel murmured. Her claws and fangs had fully retracted. Her arms hung limply at her sides.
The first among equals is said to have the powers of all other bloodlines and...
Armageddon,
Arceus whispered. There was fear in the confessor's eyes. He was clearly worried that Daemon might inflict that on all of them.
No killing, Daemon. Please.
Julian begged silently, but he knew the Vampire King had heard him. There was the softest mental caress in response. They must see and understand, Daemon continued in that musical yet deadly voice. He slowly began to walk around the room, regarding each and every vampire in it. As he met each vampire's gaze, they lowered theirs, unable to win a stare-down with him. Many actually bowed their heads. William continued to hang in the air like some very bizarre light fixture. Arceus and Isabel stayed where they were. It took a moment for Julian to shake off the compulsion to stay, and instead, he went to Daemon's side. He kept slightly behind him and to the side of the Vampire King. He would defend him like he had against William if any of the vampires attacked.
He doesn't need any protection. Isn't he showing that to them now?
But Julian had no intention of being away from him. Finally, they finished their circuit of the room and returned to William. Though he looked at William as he spoke, Daemon was addressing all in that room. I sent Selene and Heath to their second deaths. Julian asked me to do it, but I would have done so in any case. They came to Nightvallen uninvited. They sought to kill the one that would become my first fledgling. Second deaths have been earned for far less from me. Julian was shocked to see tears spring into William's eyes. He looked so like a beautiful child that it was painful to see, like a little boy about to dissolve into tears for lost friends. "What's going on here?" It was Balthazar's voice which rose up at that moment. He and Christian pushed through the vampires and came towards them. Christian made a beeline for Julian. They embraced.
Are you okay?
Christian's voice was blurred against Julian's shoulder.
I'm fine. Just a little issue about those two vampires that attacked us in Nightvallen,
he explained. Christian pulled back and looked at the floating William. His best friend put it all together in an instant.
He went after Daemon and you for it?
Yeah, the vampires were his friends.
Julian answered. Balthazar's face reddened with rage as he heard this. His silver eyes burned. He grasped William's chin cruelly. You attacked my guests? William's already porcelain-pale face went a grey colour. He opened trembling lips and stammered,
He killed Heath and Selene!
Because they fucking disobeyed my orders and went into goddamn Nightvallen! Balthazar roared. They tried to kill Christian and Julian. If Daemon hadn't killed them, I would have. Those words echoed throughout the room. Balthazar's head snapped towards all of his vampires. You've embarrassed me. You've shamed me. You've disobeyed me. I don't compel you. I give you freedom. I listen to all your goddamn complaints. But what do I get in return? Betrayal. Disrespect. Am I your lord or not? Any who think I am not worthy of leading you, speak up now. I'll have no problem showing you the old ways. Do you want that? Are we going back to that? None challenged him. Heads hung low. Shame practically radiated off of the group, excluding Julian, Christian, Daemon, and Arceus.
You are my lord, Balthazar.
William sobbed.
I'm sorry,
Balthazar's hand tightened so much on his chin that Julian swore he heard the bones creak. Don't speak. Don't even.
He's gonna kill him.
Julian whispered in horror.
Christian, I don't want this.
Please don't kill him, Balthazar.
Christian stepped up by William's side so that he was in Balthazar's line of sight. Balthazar's handsome face tightened. Christian, I know you don't like violence, but this
Isn't necessary.
Christian insisted, his voice calm and even.
He acted out of love and pain. It's clear he didn't mean to disrespect you, and it's equally clear he couldn't have done anything to Daemon or Julian.
I didn't mean it. I love you, my lord.
William bleated. Balthazar's jaw clenched. His head turned slightly towards Daemon. You are the wronged party, Daemon. What would you ask of me? If it is his death, it shall happen.
Please, Daemon, no. This is Christian's new house. I want us to be a part of it too. We can't do that with all this death.
Julian begged. I require nothing more of you than what you have already done, Daemon answered, and William was set upon the ground. The boy vampire immediately fell to his knees before Balthazar. His desire to avenge his friends' deaths is commendable. Daemon spread his arms towards the other vampires in the room. The fact that your house came to his defense without hesitation speaks well of them, and of you, Lord Balthazar. You have forged a family among people who have been cast out and ill-used. I am sorry to have taken any of them from you." Julian's eyes closed a moment as he murmured,
"Thank you, Daemon."
He opened his eyes to see Balthazar's reaction to Daemon actually speaking, not to mention what he had said. Balthazar had frozen, but then he slowly, almost haltingly, turned his head to fully face the Vampire King. For one moment, Julian could see this raw wound that was exposed, and a wild, almost shocked hope in Balthazar's expression. The look was gone as fast as it had appeared. Balthazar blinked and went back to looking down at William, though he didn't really seem to be seeing the other vampire. I appreciate your kind words." His voice rose. "Daemon and Julian are my guests. You will treat them as you would any other member of this house. Do you understand me?" There were murmured assents all around. Silence fell once more. "Arceus, you were going to take us to where we might feed?" Daemon asked the confessor. Arceus's head snapped up and his mouth opened and closed rather fish-like for a moment. But then he said graciously,
Of course. Let me take you there now.
Daemon held out a hand towards Julian without turning to look at him. Julian cast a glance at Christian, but his best friend urged him to go with a nod of his head. He would take care of Balthazar and the aftermath of this mess. Julian grasped Daemon's hand, and they followed Arceus out of the room. The other vampires parted before them with bowed heads and averted eyes.
"Never a dull moment with you, is there?"
Julian asked Daemon. The Vampire King flashed him a smile. "Never, indeed." Join us next time for episode 21, On Raven's Wings.
The entire team is really grateful for how much support we've received. I didn't start writing to get rich. There are far easier ways to do that. I never thought gay romance would make me into a household name with movie deals. I started because I wanted to entertain people with the stuff I loved. But now we've been able to do things like this podcast with all this amazing talent. On the Wraith Rain team, we're just ordinary people with bills and loans to pay. We have to make careful decisions with our money like everyone else. This is why we're always honored that people decide to support us, and it makes us want to keep doing even more. We look forward to bringing you all 147 episodes of Everdark. But after that, who knows? Sky might be the limit.
The Everdark podcast by Ex Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thillis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.